antibiotics, a group of medicines that are used to treat infections caused by bacteria and certain parasites. In today's society, you can find antibiotics in various forms such as liquids, tablets, capsules, injections, creams, ointments, and lotions. However, it hasn't always been this simple to get rid of an ailment. In 1928, Alexander Fleming, professor of bacteriology in St. Mary's Hospital in London, discovered the first true antibiotic, penicillin. But before its introduction, there was no effective treatment for illness such as pneumonia, gonorrhea, or rheumatic fever, causing many people to perish due to common illnesses. As penicillin became a sort of miracle drug for the sick, World War II took its course. Soon there were plans to make penicillin available to the troops. Scientists realized that British factories couldn't support the mass production of penicillin due to the war efforts, so they traveled to Peoria, Illinois to find a solution.
The year is 1914. The European subcontinent is embroiled in bloody trench warfare. Soldiers on all sides are victims to artillery fire, mustard gas, and new automatic rifles. Their biggest enemy, however, is infection. Of those wounded in battle, few will survive even their minor injuries. Field hospitals populate the front lines, with young doctors and nurses working day and night to stem the stealthy killer. Their main defense is antiseptic, which proves just as lethal to the patients as no treatment at all. One frustrated young doctor called Alexander Fleming is unwilling to accept the inefficacy of current medicine to rescue the wounded in battle. He would later dedicate his life to understanding and fighting infections, going on to pioneer one of the most influential medical discoveries of the 20th century, a discovery which Time magazine claims has altered the course of history.
Meanwhile, clinical studies showed that therapeutic promises of penicillin against many different diseases and soon became the primary treatment for disease in the armed forces of Britain and the United States. By 1945, more than 6.8 trillion units were being manufactured across the country. And by 1945, penicillin was available to customers in his or her corner store pharmacy.
Through mass production methods, America is continually increasing its output of penicillin, the new drug that effects almost miraculous cures. The liquid medium in these bottles will grow the mold that forms penicillin. First, however, the liquid is purified by sterilization in great ovens. After sterilization, the medium is carefully inoculated with the seeds of the penicillin mold. The next step is incubation. Slowly, the mold that contains the precious drug forms in the bottles. All penicillin produced is used by the Allied fighting forces. The liquid now charged with penicillin is poured from the bottles. Turned into a powder, it is ready for use.
While penicillin changed lives and the way infections were treated across the world, Fleming warned the public that this drug will continue to make miracles happen as long as it is used and provided with careful restrictions. If it is carelessly distributed, it may become ineffective. Many saw this warning as unnecessary and pushed forward with other antibiotic discoveries. As technologies ran low and discoveries became scarce, penicillin became the main antibiotic for common illnesses.
This brings us to today. What is often misconstrued is that antibiotics cure the common cold or flu virus. Very few people know that antibiotics have no effects on viruses and never have. Some may say, but there are so many forms of antibiotics, something has to work, right? Wrong. As a matter of fact, there hasn't been any antibiotic discovery in over 30 years. Then again, there hasn't been a market for it either. Most of the antibiotics used today are based off of penicillin, but penicillin isn't working anymore, so what now? Well, let's go back. How did penicillin go from 0 to 0 all in a matter of 60 years? 2 words, antibiotic resistance. Antibiotic resistance is the result of overprescribing medicines, thus leading to the development of resistant bacteria in our bodies. Resistant bacteria does not respond to antibiotics that may have worked in the past, causing simple illnesses to become more extreme as years pass over time.
However, many American citizens have ignored the issue of antibiotic resistance. refusing to finish prescriptions because they're feeling better, or demanding medications for common colds and illnesses that can't be cured with antibiotics. When one doesn't complete the series of medications they are prescribed, they are actually making themselves worse off, sparking the creation or resistant bacteria within their bodies. As doctors give in to the countless pleas from consumers and over-the-counter drugs become abused and unaware country, chaos breaks loose. The U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention report that up to 50% of antibiotic prescriptions in the U.S. are unnecessary or not effective as prescribed.
Aha, here's our patient. The patient has received all known antibiotic treatments to no effect. In conclusion, either he is not ill, or we have a new strain of microbes.
Or this could even just be a case of resistance to antibiotics. Let me explain. When the body is infected by bacteria, it attempts to defend itself in several ways, by increasing its temperature, but mainly by using its immune system. As soon as a foreign body enters the organism, it's detected straight away and alarm bells ring. Lots of white blood cells come along to identify the culprits and get rid of them. But sometimes these defenses are overwhelmed by bacteria. That's when the illness really begins. Luckily, since antibiotics were discovered, we can help patients protect themselves. These drugs destroy most bacteria or create a hostile environment for them. Antibiotics soon became a quick-fix solution. For the slightest scratch, a course of antibiotics. It was so effective in preventing infections from developing that the use of antibiotics increased. They became widely used to treat battery-farmed poultry and pigs. But before long, the illness returns. And antibiotic treatments suddenly stop working. What happened? Well, before bacterial cells divide, they duplicate their genetic material. This material is composed of DNA. Portions of the long molecule can hold precise information on the activity and development of the bacteria. These portions are what we call genes. Each gene is composed of a sequence of 4 elements, called nucleotides, of which 2 are always matched in pairs because they're complementary. As DNA is copied very rapidly, errors in the copy frequently occur. These errors are called mutations. Most of the time, these mutations are of no consequence, but sometimes they can be harmful to the bacteria. However, with such a high number of mutations, some of these copy errors can result in resistance to antibiotics. When in contact with the antibiotic, the resistant bacteria will be the only ones to survive. In fact, the drug will have chosen the resistant strain. And then, since there is no longer any competition for food, the bacteria can multiply very fast. It's exactly like natural selection. Individuals with the most favorable characteristics reproduce more than the others and will be able to continue to evolve. Indeed, with antibiotics, we are reproducing what nature did 4 billion years ago that led to the evolution of species.
Well, miss, are you demonstrating here that the patient is suffering from acute Darwinitis?
You could say that.
Aha, that's exactly how I see it. Gentlemen, This case is very interesting. Let's move on to something else.
Some people say there is no issue. The superbug is a myth to scare citizens into submission. Wrong. Many don't understand that the superbug is real and it's stealthy. It has been growing and growing over the past 60 years into an invincible, incurable, irreversible bacteria that has the ultimate consequence, death. Every time someone has a headache, sore throat, sneeze, or irregular body function, people flee to the local pharmacy or doctor's office begging for a solution. Scarcely does an individual turn to the natural remedies provided to us by the earth. There are remedies such as garlic, grapefruit seed extract, ginger, oregano oil, oil leaf extract, wild indigo, and many other items that can be found locally.
Echinacea can be hard to keep in stock this time of year.
Echinacea is actually an immune stimulant. It helps all of the really good antimicrobial properties in there so that your immune system is boosted and it could fight off the virus or bacteria, whatever it is that you're dealing with.
It's just one of a range of naturopathic preventatives and remedies for colds. Honey and oil of oregano are said to have antimicrobial properties. Herbs like cinnamon and ginger increase circulation, which help boost the immune system. Then there's garlic.
Garlic on its own has been shown to be really great for immune system. So you can even chop some of that up and put it in your tea when you're having your warming teas, 2 to 3 times a day. Having that raw garlic can definitely help boost your immune system.
What actually works depends on who you talk to.
Orange juice, I guess. Vitamin C.
Cold effects.
Chicken soup always works very, very well.
When I feel something coming on, I take echinacea for sure. Or oil of oregano is good too.
Medical doctors may say the evidence on things like echinacea and golden seal is anecdotal, but do agree nasal rinses will shorten the length of a cold, and that zinc helps too.
The zinc actually binds to the viral particles, and so it helps prevent replication. So you won't get as many viral particles causing the multiple symptoms.
And what about that old favorite, chicken soup? Some studies have shown it has anti-inflammatory properties, but some say the jury is still out on that one. There's one old saying you can count on, though: an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Frequent hand washing, okay, and avoidance. And number 2 is aerobic exercise on a routine basis. So if you do those 2 things and get your flu shot, you're going to reduce your likelihood of ever getting those problems by 80 or 90%.
Maybe you aren't someone who spends a lot of time at the pharmacy or doctor's office asking for prescriptions, but are you aware of what is in the foods that you consume every day?
Probably not. 80% of the antibiotics produced in the U.S. are pumped into factory farm animals, which in turn are processed and consumed by the citizens of the country, adding to the superbug problem that is already running rampant. Since most of the foods we eat and household products we use contain antibiotics or antibacterials, we absorb a decent amount of immunity to everyday germs. Things such as soap, Kleenex, detergents, household cleaners, and skincare products all contain some form of antibiotic, which creates a resistant bacteria.
Oh yeah, howdy.
When antibiotics were first introduced in 1944, they were considered a miracle cure. They were used to treat a wide variety of diseases, like tuberculosis, salmonella, and pneumonia. Antibiotics were intended to be used sparingly to preserve their effectiveness. Today, most of our antibiotics are fed to factory farm animals. Antibiotics make the animals grow faster and enable them to survive unhealthy conditions. This system is creating antibiotic resistant superbugs, making us all vulnerable to diseases they once cured. These superbugs are contaminating our soil, our water, and the very food we eat. It doesn't have to be this way. You have a choice, and together we can change the system. Support meat without drugs and stop the superbugs.
When you think about it, antibiotics are a part of our everyday lives. That's why they aren't working anymore, or they won't in the very near future. Information released by the World Health Organization this year states that our global community is entering a post-antibiotic era. On April 30th, 2014, the World Health Organization released a report on antibiotic resistance across the globe. This report reveals that serious threats of antibiotic resistance are no longer a prediction for the future. It's happening right now in every region of the world, and it has potential to affect everyone of any age, in any country. Antibiotic resistance, and bacteria changes so antibiotics no longer work in people who need them to treat infections, is now a major public health issue.
The World Health Organization is sounding the alarm. Its latest report says some of the most powerful weapons we have in the fight against infectious disease are useless because of a growing global resistance to antibiotics. And if we don't act now, it means even minor infections could become major problems. Cass Rusi reports.
You survive a knee replacement, but bacteria sets in. Antibiotics, those life-saving drugs, help fight the infection, the stuff of what modern medicine is built on.
In terms of some of the key steps,
but in an ominous report, the World Health Organization warns that resistance to antibiotics has reached alarming levels, rendering many of the life-saving treatments useless against infections.
when we are most vulnerable and in need of these medicines, there is a chance that they're simply not going to be available, and we are not going to be able to have access to effective medical care in a number of instances.
The report identifies at least 7 so-called superbugs, powerful bacteria resistant to antibiotics that the WHO now says are a global threat, including stronger strains of bacteria like E. coli and Salmonella. And in Canada, the WHO says the sexually transmitted disease gonorrhea is showing resistance to treatment.
It's all true.
And for more on this,
the bacteria are rapidly becoming resistant to antibiotics, and we're running out of choices. I mean, I fully expect to see a lot of 100% resistant bacteria that I'm trying to treat during my career.
Yeah, so this is a nice...
In his lab at Toronto's Sunnybrook Hospital, Dr. Andrew Seymour studies one of the latest threats, a hospital-acquired infection called MRSA.
The mauve color are the bacteria.
While some countries have been aggressive in surveillance for antibiotic resistance, he says Canada lacks a national plan.
We can't rely on being in a protected environment here in Canada. We know that these organisms are circulating in other parts of the world, and sooner or later, if they're not already here, they will be here.
In its first global report on antibiotic resistance, the WHO uses unusually strong language in describing this clear and present danger, saying far from an apocalyptic fantasy, this is a very real possibility right now. Cass Rusi, CBC News, Toronto.
And for more on this, we're joined by CBC News medical contributor Dr. Samir Sinha. So, Doctor, are you seeing a lot more patients with this kind of resistance?
I think clinicians all over the world are actually seeing a growing amount of antibiotic resistance in our patients. So things like pneumonias or antibiotics, when we actually look at what is available to treat our patients with, we're seeing that we're having fewer and fewer choices, with this becoming a growing issue.
But a lot of patients think it's an easy solution, right? What should patients be told?
Well, I think the first thing we have to remind people is that not every infection actually requires antibiotics. So the first aspect is, if it's a bacterial infection, it could require that, but sometimes just symptom management and our own immune systems are good enough. So I think it's reminding us that we can do a lot of things to prevent infections, such as washing our hands, getting those flu vaccinations, pneumonia vaccinations. But then when it's time to think about, do I need an antibiotic, is have that conversation with your physician and say, is there anything else I could do, or is an antibiotic what I need?
And what about doctors? What's your advice for them?
Doctors are increasingly recognizing this is an important issue, and so many of us are starting to educate ourselves. Many colleagues are starting to do programming where we understand when is it best to prescribe, what's the right thing to prescribe for what duration, but also reminding our patients that if we give you an antibiotic, take the full prescription.
Yeah, we hear that all the time. But is part of it to learn just how to say no to patients who are asking for this?
Well, I think it's two parts. I think one is, to have the courage and to spend the time and have the conversation to say, this is why I don't think an antibiotic is the best thing for you. But I think it's also to get patients to start asking their clinicians, Doc, is there something else that I can do other than just taking an antibiotic?
Because it's serious, right? People can die.
Absolutely. We're seeing growing prevalence of things like MRSA, so that's a common resistant organism in our hospitals and now in our communities. And we have multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. These are real issues that are happening. The sky isn't falling, but we can do a lot better to actually use these resources wisely so that we can preserve our mutual health.
Thanks so much, Doctor.
Thank you.
Dr. Simha.
Across the globe, in 114 countries, ailments such as bloodstream infections, diarrhea, pneumonia, urinary tract infections, and gonorrhea are becoming resistant to treatment. These 5 diseases are considered common and serious infections. What was once treatable now has no known cure. Even last resort, antibiotics, usually only used for severe cases, have no effect. Antibiotic resistance causes people to be sick for longer increments of time and increases the risk of death. Resistance also increases the cost of healthcare with lengthier stays in hospital and more intensive care required.
Key tools to tackle antibiotic resistance, such as basic systems to track and monitor the problem, show gaps or do not exist in many countries. While some countries have taken important steps in addressing the problem, every country and individual needs to do more. Other important actions include preventing infections from happening in the first place, through better hygiene, access to clean water, infection control in healthcare facilities, and vaccination to reduce the needs for antibiotics. The World Health Organization is also calling attention to the needs to develop new diagnostics, antibiotics, and other tools to allow healthcare professionals to stay ahead of antibiotic resistance.
Good.
Dr. Keiji Fukuda, WHO's Assistant Director General for Health Security, states this: without urgent, coordinated action by many stakeholders, the world is headed for a post-antibiotic era, in which common infections and minor injuries, which have been treatable for decades, will once kill again. He also says that effective antibiotics have been one of the pillars allowing us to live longer, live healthier, and benefit from modern medicine. Unless we take significant actions to improve efforts to prevent infections and also change how we produce, prescribe, and use antibiotics, the world will lose more and more of these global public health goods, and implications will be devastating.
We are living in a post-antibiotic world. That's what the World Health Organization has to say. Why? Because penicillin, which has been used to save millions of lives all over the world, has been so overprescribed that bacteria are now resistant to it. This is what the World Health Organization has to say. The problem is so serious that it threatens the achievements of modern medicine. A post-antibiotic era in which common infections and minor injuries can kill is a very real possibility for the 21st century.
It's not just a possibility, it's actually happening.
Happening right now, that's what they're saying. And the reason is crazy because bacteria can adapt so quickly, and doctors are prescribing it or misprescribing it, and patients are taking it in the wrong doses, that now there's like, we're on the precipice, basically, of having...
And especially when people don't take the entire recommended dosage, right? And they leave off all the really strong bacteria. Those survive, and so we're creating these super bacteria.
Yeah, we've bred these little...
we bred these
crazy germs, yeah, it's insane.
And the other problem too is that we're prescribing it a lot in farms to cattle, just to prevent their hole on the side of their stomachs from healing, because we're pumping them full of corn in there because they can't digest it through their throats, right? So we use the antibiotics in a really unnatural and detrimental way. All that goes into our food. So even if we're not taking the antibiotics ourselves, we end up being affected by them.
But the craziest thing is that when Alexander Fleming accepted his Nobel Prize for penicillin, he was one of the creators along with 2 other guys, he said that one day, if we keep prescribing this in such large amounts, like one day we will be in a world where this just won't work. he called it out, and now 70 years later, we know that he was right.
And that world is scary because you think of how much we rely on antibiotics. Like we rely on them for childbirth, we rely on them for simple operations. You cut your finger. Back in the days, if you cut your toe or something, you could end up getting your whole foot cut off, right? Because of infections and gangrene. Nowadays, you take an antibiotic, done, right?
Yeah, and the problem is
we
that
won't have that benefit.
we won't have the benefit, and there hasn't been a new antibiotic developed in the last 30 years. So we don't have something that will follow penicillin. We have to literally create something new. Part of it is because scientists haven't really had success in developing it, but there also hasn't been a market because penicillin's been doing the job. So what are we going to do? Let us know what you think in the comments. Are we headed towards some kind of massive, crazy germ apocalypse, or are scientists going to come through and save us all? Let us